good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the third day of the conference. I'm with Enric Llurda, one of our keynotes, one of our special guests. And for me, it's a pleasure. I'm Dr. Liliana Cuesta from Universidad de La Sabana. It's a pleasure for me to introduce him to you once again and share a couple of reflections during these few minutes. Welcome, Enric, again. Okay, we're going to start with the first question. Enric, you proposed in your work, in the very many studies that you have conducted, to examine the international dimension of the language. What type of implications do you think that it brings to language educators?
Oh, well, I think it has several implications, and I hope this will this will open the debate, and I will make this, at least I will introduce this topic and provide some answers in my presentation later today. But just to give a short answer to this, I think that the fact that we are teaching English and that English is such a unique language in its international status, the fact that it's the lingua franca for the whole world, makes us consider things like, for example, what is the model of English we want to teach. And if we were talking about any other language, we would say, okay, we want to teach the language in order to approximate and communicate with a specific group of people. So we should aim at speaking as similar as possible to the way these people speak. But with English, this is absolutely impossible, right? So we can speak English to a British person, but we can speak English to a Nigerian person, or we can speak English to a Chinese person. And then the whole idea of what is our audience and what is our target changes. So I think that one of the implications is that we should get rid and forget about anything that is very locally based. And often, sometimes teachers are obsessed with teaching, slang that's used in a certain particular part, or idiomatic expressions. And I think that they're fun, they're interesting. I mean, it's always useful to know, good to know things. I mean, I wouldn't say no to anything, but I mean, I think there are so many more important things that we need to consider in class, and we should start by prioritizing. Okay, there are many other implications, but I think that would be a first.
Just a reminder, his keynote is the closing keynote for today, and I'm sure that he's going to address, as he said, many of the aspects that he was mentioning briefly in this conversation. Okay, let's go to the second question. And you were mentioning that one of the missions that we have as language educators, or those of us who train teachers, is to get rid of these notions or these preconceptions and perhaps assumptions and actions regarding these role models that we have been adopting for some time. Why do you think that there is still nowadays a strong tendency to believe in native models of language in language teaching? And just to recap on our coffee conversation a while ago, we know that there are models still there. And for everybody attending TESOL Colombia, we know that from the attendees, at least there is a high, we could survey them, but there is no time for doing that. But we know that in the audience there are people, and not only in the audience, but in the global audience, there are still people who believe that. So what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, the native speaker model is still quite powerful. And I would say that a lot of teachers and English teachers still believe that, native speakers are better speakers than non-native speakers. And that, and probably if we would ask any non-native teacher in the world whether they would change their identity or whether they would like to, press a button and speak like a native speaker, a lot of them would say yes. But I mean, I think we should critically think about that because I mean, then the question is whether, I mean, would they be so happily changing their identity? And if a Colombian teacher thinks that he would be or she would be better speaking like a native speaker, I mean, would that mean that he would like to be a different person? Because, I mean, accent, for example, has a lot to do with identity, right? But going back to your question, you say, why is this still so dominant? And I think that there are many reasons, but I mean, some are historical, and they might go back to the fact that we have built our modern societies on the idea that, you know, the monolingual condition is the natural state for a person and for a country. So when nation states were created, I mean, they were created on the idea that, you know, one nation, one language, right? And also, even though in the world the most frequent and natural state is to be multilingual, we still have in mind the idea that normally people are monolingual and maybe some people become bilingual, which is not true because, as I said, the majority of the people are bilingual or multilingual. These conceptions still affect then the way we perceive languages, and we tend to think that you know, the native speaker reflects this ideal condition of the monolingual speaker, the natural speaker, right? Whereas a non-native speaker is somebody who has been sort of artificially added to the community, and then still a lot of people think, oh yeah, they can speak the language, but they don't belong there. In English, I mean, I think this could be applied to any language, but in English particularly, with this idea of English as an international language, the whole idea of who belongs to the community of speakers is changed because the community of speakers is global. But even for much smaller languages, I think we should also be more open and challenge the idea that only native speakers have, you know, the right to claim the language their own. I mean, Widowson back in '94 had a very challenging papers calling The Ownership of English. And he was talking to a North American audience and said, okay, well, if you think you are the legitimate owner of English, me as a British can tell you, no, you are not, because I'm British and I'm, you know, more of an owner than you are. Which would be a kind of a ridiculous statement, but he was pointing that out because saying, well, it would be as ridiculous as this to say that because you are North American, you are more legitimately an owner of the language than maybe a European, you know, French person or a Japanese person. And you know, still we are in this time in which, you know, native speaker models are still dominant. Societies still have this idea that monolingualism is the normal state, and states still, you know, they are gradually understanding that you need to be open to foreign languages, but there are waves, right? And sometimes there is a wave of open doors to other languages. Sometimes countries tend to be more closed and, okay, let's protect our language. But hopefully this is gradually evolving, and we are becoming more aware of the need to be, you know, naturally accepting multilingualism in our societies, in our conversations, and in our classes, for example. Yep.
Thank you very much. And our last question, Enric, in this very interesting conversation is specifically, and I know that you have gained and you have been with us all of these 3 days of conference, and you have perceived, you have had your senses activated for the types of things that our Colombian educators are doing. So coming back and trying to join the two aspects, the needs of our Colombian educators, the current actions that they are taking and they are pursuing, and the proposal that you're bringing to the conference regarding this invitation to use consciously the language and being global but effective users of language. What are some of the recommendations? Give me at least 2, if you don't mind, that we can really take and share it with our educators who will be watching this video, please.
Yeah, because ultimately, I mean, they are the people who are responsible for building the community of speakers of English in Colombia or elsewhere, right? Yeah, this is important, and I think that for teachers, it's quite important to to participate in places where they can sort of reflect on ideas like what happens here in this TESOL conference, and they can be challenged. Their way of thinking, the way of looking at things can be challenged, and then they can start a reflection on topics like this. So first, we need to engage them in conversations And this, I think, will be quite an important element for empowering them. They will feel, I mean, after talking about these things, and I'm sure that after listening, for example, to Fernando's presentation first day, or Camila's yesterday, and a lot of the presentations. I mean, I've been attending several, concurrent sessions that were fascinating, very interesting sessions, and each one will find elements to start, thinking and on how they can really contribute and how they are really contributing to the profession without aiming at being somebody else, right? I mean, right. They don't need to change their identity. They don't need to wish to be like somebody born in Massachusetts.
I know.
And this is important for them to feel empowered and then to be, fully bringing their own potential to the class, right? And that's when they can really transform their educational environment. So yeah, these discussions are important, and it would help if the society was more open to these ideas. But I think we need to aim modestly to our community, and therefore if we change the way we are thinking, the way we are reflecting on these things, I think that this gradually will spread out. And in fact, this is happening. I mean, there are more and more people who say, yes, of course. I mean, professionals who use English to go abroad, and they say, yeah, well, I realize that my accent is different from others, but right, and my business is going well, and they bring back this experience, and it's showing that what we are doing with English is appropriating it for our purposes. Exactly.
More than appropriate, because I think that's another interesting discussion, but due to time reasons, we are not going to have it. What is appropriate and what is acceptable? That's another interesting thing. Well, last but not least, thank you, Enric, for this conversation. And I'm sure that, once this is distributed in our social media, in our webpage, more and more viewers are going to listen to you. And our plenary is going to be transmitted via streaming and things like that. So thank you very much on behalf of our TESOL Colombia 2 community. And we really hope, and I do really hope, that it is not the first visit, but it will be the opening to many academic collaboration. Thank you very much to everyone, and thank you for the wonderful team who's recording this conversation as well.
Let me also thank you and University of La Sabana and the team who are recording, because it's been a really very pleasant experience. So thank you very much.